Imagine a white powder that is the most addictive substance in the world, one that rots the human liver, blocks arteries, causes obesity, and silently kills millions of people across the globe every year. When a person consumes this powder, the exact same chemicals are released in their brain as when taking cocaine or heroin. You might be thinking, I am talking about some highly dangerous illegal drug. But no, I am talking about the very thing sitting on your dining table right now, which dissolves in your morning tea and which you feed your children every day for breakfast, thinking it is healthy. We are talking about sugar. You might think sugar is just a flavor, a simple sweet thing. But after hearing the history you are about to learn today, you will never look at that sugar container in your kitchen the same way again. It is not food, but the story of the world's most terrifying industry, the darkest history of slavery, and the biggest scientific fraud of the 20th century. Going back a few hundred years, 99% of the world's population had never even tasted sugar in their entire lives, as our ancestors only knew honey or fresh fruits for sweetness. Sugarcane cultivation first began in New Guinea and India was the first country to discover how to boil sugarcane juice and dry it to create crystals, which were called cond, the very word from which the English word candy is derived. At that time, sugar was not a common food item, but was considered a very rare and expensive medicine. And when Alexander the Great's army came to India, they saw sugarcane for the first time and astonishingly called it a mysterious reed that produces honey without bees. When this sugar reached Europe via Arab traders, it was worth its weight in gold and became known as white gold. European kings and the wealthy kept this sugar locked in safes, and England's Queen Elizabeth I was so severely addicted to sugar that all her teeth rotted and turned black. Surprisingly, having black teeth was not a matter of shame back then, but rather a status symbol, proving you were rich enough to afford sugar, prompting ordinary Europeans to deliberately blacken their teeth with coal to look wealthy. However, this European wealth was about to become a massive curse for the world. As the 16th and 17th centuries arrived, the trend of drinking tea and coffee grew in Europe, causing the demand for sugar to skyrocket overnight. But there was one problem. Cultivating sugarcane and extracting sugar from it is the most labor-intensive and blood and sweat-demanding work in the world. Working all day in the scorching heat of a sugarcane field could kill anyone, and Europeans did not want to do this work themselves. They needed free labor for this white gold. This marked the beginning of the most horrific and cruel chapter in human history, the transatlantic slave trade. European countries began kidnapping human beings from Africa like animals, chaining them, stuffing them into ships, and leaving them to die in the sugarcane fields of the Caribbean islands and America. Historians state that over 12 million Africans were enslaved simply so Europeans could put sugar in their tea. Those sugarcane fields were called wells of death, where enslaved people were forced to work continuously for 18 hours a day. While boiling sugarcane juice in large vats, many slaves would fall into the boiling liquid and die. Yet factory owners, without caring, would turn that same juice into sugar and send it to Europe. The average lifespan of a slave arriving at a sugarcane field was only 7 to 9 years, after which they would die from exhaustion, disease, or whippings. This means that the sweetness of sugar, upon which today's modern world is built, has the blood and bones of millions of slaves buried in its foundation. Sugar was not a trade, it was an absolute genocide. Time passed, slavery ended, machines arrived, and sugar became cheap enough to reach every home. But the truly terrifying game of sugar was yet to begin in the 20th century. In the 1950s and 1960s, a flood of heart attacks suddenly struck America, with young people dying of heart failure while walking down the streets. Even U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower suffered a heart attack in his office in 1955, spreading panic across the entire nation. Scientists frantically began searching for what sudden disease had afflicted humanity. At that time, the scientific world split into two factions. On one side was a very honest British scientist, John Yudkin, who clearly stated in his research that the culprit behind these deaths was not fat, but the continuously increasing amount of sugar in our diets, warning that sugar was acting as a poison in our blood. On the other side was an American scientist, Ansel Keys, who claimed that the real cause of heart attacks wasn't sugar, but the saturated fat in our food. When massive sugar manufacturing companies and the Sugar Research Foundation realized that John Yudkin was painting sugar as the villain, the ground slipped from beneath their feet, because if the world found out that sugar causes heart attacks, their entire industry would be ruined overnight. Therefore, the sugar industry orchestrated the biggest and dirtiest fraud in history, naming it Project 226. The Sugar Foundation secretly paid 3 top scientists from Harvard University, the world's biggest university at the time, a bribe equivalent to about $50,000 $50,000 today to write a fake research paper. In 1967, this research by the Harvard scientists was published in the world's most prestigious medical journal, completely blaming fat and cholesterol while declaring sugar totally spotless and safe, because this research was conducted by Harvard scientists, governments, doctors, and the general public worldwide trusted it blindly, while the honest scientist John Yudkin, who was telling the truth, was humiliated globally. His research funding was stopped, and his career was destroyed. The sugar industry had bought science itself with the power of money. Following that fake Harvard research, a madness for low-fat and fat-free diets erupted globally in the 1980s, making everyone terrified of fat. Food companies started removing fat from all their products, creating fat-free milk, fat-free yogurt, and fat-free bread. But there was a massive biological problem. When you remove the natural fat from any food, it ends up tasting exactly like cardboard or dirt, making it impossible for anyone to eat fat-free food. To make their tasteless food delicious again, companies chose a weapon that made humanity permanently sick. They started dumping massive amounts of sugar into that food. The fat-free food that you and your parents still buy from the market today, thinking it is very healthy, is actually a sugar bomb. From tomato ketchup to bread, from packaged juices to children's Cerelac, and from mayonnaise to peanut butter, over 80% of the packaged foods in the market today contain sugar hidden under various names. Companies have created more than 60 new names to hide sugar, such as high fructose corn syrup, maltodextrin, sucrose, and dextrose, so that when you read the back of the packet, you don't see the word sugar and are tricked into believing you are eating something healthy. But why exactly can't we stop eating sugar? And why does our brain crave more sweets after eating something sweet? The answer lies in our biology. Millions of years ago, when humans lived in forests, sweet things were extremely rare. So whenever our ancestors found a sweet fruit, their brain released a chemical called dopamine, signaling that this was highly useful, packed with energy, and should be eaten more. It was a natural survival alarm. However, today's refined sugar is not a natural substance. It is a pure chemical manufactured in factories. When you drink a can of soda or eat a chocolate today, a sudden flood of sugar enters your bloodstream, and your brain fails to comprehend this extreme sweetness, releasing as much dopamine all at once as it typically does when smoking a cigarette or taking cocaine. Your biology has been hacked. You are not weak. Your willpower is not weak, but rather you are fighting a losing battle against the world's most powerful biological drug, cleverly designed by a multi-billion-dollar industry to control your brain. This is exactly why diseases that solely afflicted the elderly 100 years ago, like fatty liver, type 2 diabetes, and heart attacks, are now striking young people in their 20s and 30s, and science is even beginning to accept that Alzheimer's, the memory loss disease, is essentially type 3 diabetes of the brain, resulting from decades of heavy sugar consumption. So, the next time you are strolling through a supermarket and pick up a beautifully packaged box of 100% real juice or healthy oats, turn it around and look closely at its nutritional label, because the very thing selling you health on the outside harbors that 1960s corporate deception on the inside, a deception that has sickened the entire human race in a sweet illusion. Sugar forged the chains of slaves in history, and today it has enslaved our minds.